Hello everyone, this video tutorial will cover the muscles of the shoulder as well as the arm. Forearm would be their own little tutorial. So if we pull down the skin here on a posterior view, we can first recognize some landmark muscles. We've got deltoid here. We'll begin by identifying trapezius. We have trapezius posteriorly and latissimus dorsi as well. The word trapeze referring to a kite. So this is half of your kite. If you have it on the other side, you can see how the entire structure would look like a kite. Latissimus referring to flat and broad. This is a flat, broad muscle, and dorsi means back. So this is latissimus dorsi, flat on the back. If we were to reflect or pull back trapezius, much like we would in the lab, only now we're going to test these on EPR. If you pull back trapezius, you're expecting three muscles attaching to the scapula. You're going to have rhomboid major, rhomboid minor, and levator scapulae. So once again, pull back trapezius, and you're expecting rhomboid major, rhomboid minor, and the levator scapulae from the superior aspect of the scapula up to the cervical vertebrae. While we're here discussing the axial appendiculars from posterior, we can go then to the anterior axial appendiculars. There's only three on the word bank that we need to cover. So we'll have, pectoralis major, a very large fan-shaped muscle. You'll have pectoralis minor, and you see its attachment to the ribs up to the coracoid process, and that's shared with a couple of other muscles. So here's the pectoralis minor. And right on the wall of the thorax, you have a serrated muscle, serratus anterior. And serratus anterior, you can see its proximal attachment being like the serrated edge of a knife or a saw. And if we were to go find its distal attachment, we'd actually have to go around posteriorly to the scapula. That makes an attachment back to the scapula. So let's return back to a posterior view. And in the posterior view, we're going to pick up the scapulohumeral muscles now, meaning they're coursing from scapula to the humerus. There are going to be 6 total. We first begin by identifying deltoid again. Deltoid means triangle-like, and so here's your triangle-like muscle here. All right, you're going to be able to see deltoid posteriorly. You'll be able to see deltoid laterally as well as anteriorly. So there's deltoid. And once deltoid's been pulled back a little bit, so in the lab on the cadaver, we've pulled back deltoid just a little bit off of this spine, so you can see a nice landmark structure. You're going to use the spine of the scapula as a landmark. Second landmark in this view on the cadaver will be the long head of triceps. These are two things that when you're in the posterior view of the shoulder, two things you've got to be looking for. And so if we have the spine of the scapula, above it we would have supraspinatus. Below it we would have infraspinatus. Supra meaning above the spine, infra meaning below the spine, and there's infraspinatus in its entirety. We can outline it there. And then we'll have teres minor and teres major. And that brings me to the second landmark, which technically is a posterior arm muscle, but this is the long head of triceps brachii, or triceps brachii long head. The landmark is, on every cadaver in the laboratory, we make sure you can see this, long head of triceps splits teres minor from teres major because of long head's attachment to the scapula. Now once more, in the posterior view, two things to start your naming. We have the spine of the scapula. Why? Well, above it is the supraspinatus, and below it is the infraspinatus. You have the long head of triceps. Why? Above it is teres minor, and below it is teres major. You can see how the long head splits the two. So teres major and teres minor. And why we also will use long head of triceps as a landmark, splitting minor and major, is now we can effectively name the other heads of triceps. So if we have the long head, and I course lateral to it, that's the lateral head. There's no short head here. There's lateral head. If we course medial and deep to the long, it's medial head. So once more, if this is long and I go away from the body, this is lateral head. If this is long and I go towards the body and slightly deep, that will be the medial head. In review, we've got supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor. Those are 3 of the 4 rotator cuff muscles, the sits muscles we call them. Supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor. We need to go to the anterior view to find the 4th. And the fourth muscle is subscapularis. To find subscapularis on the cadaver in the laboratory, you return to an anterior view and you look deep in the axillary region and you'll find subscapularis. We would describe subscapularis as again being deep in the axillary fossa, or deep in the axilla. And what we'll find is that subscapularis is named appropriately because it's on the front of the scapula. So there's the scapula back there with that muscle on the anterior surface of it. This is subscapularis. We've already identified the 6 scapulohumeral muscles. We've identified the posterior arm muscle, which is triceps and the 3 heads. And now we'll look at the anterior arm. So if we're looking at the anterior arm, and we have to first begin by identifying a nice, relatively straightforward muscle, which is deltoid. So if we find deltoid, deltoid's going to be helpful for us again. Nice triangular shaped muscle. You'll see that deltoid is pointing to a muscle right here. Now we'll get to it, but before we get to this muscle that deltoid points to, you walk up to a cadaver, the first muscle you find in the anterior view is biceps brachii. So here's biceps brachii in its entirety. You know that it's the most superficial in the anterior compartment, and you're not going to call anything biceps unless you can see 1 and 2 heads on the cadaver. You have to look for them, you'll find them. This is the long head. Long head is more anatomically lateral, more lateral. Short head is anatomically medial in comparison. And one of the things we have to say is step back and recognize the fact that short head shares with another muscle that you kind of see, long name, short little muscle, coracobrachialis. Once more, short head shares with the muscle that we're going to identify here, which is coracobrachialis. Understood, this is not the view that you have in the laboratory. The view you have in the laboratory is a bit more like this. Short head courses proximally and makes a shared attachment to the coracoid process with coracobrachialis. So keep in mind, if you find the long head's more lateral, you should also keep in mind that the short head shares with another muscle, coracobrachialis. The nice thing about coracobrachialis, you guys will learn or have learned that a nerve pierces it. So you're going to have 2 things to help us with coracobrachialis, a small muscle in many of the bodies. But again, we have 2 things to help us. Short head here of biceps brachii shares with coracobrachialis, and a nerve is going to pierce it. So we've got biceps brachii, long head, this tendon of, short head, and coracobrachialis out of the way. Now we have to deal with the muscle here that is deep to biceps. Okay, so this is biceps brachii highlighted. Deep to it there, you can see a little bit over there as well. Deep to it is called brachialis. So again, highlighted is biceps brachii. Deep to it will be the brachialis. It's good to leave the muscle on to have a relationship. One of the easiest ways to find your brachialis is, just like on the cadaver, put deltoid back on. Deltoid points us to brachialis. Once more, there's deltoid. You find the tip of the deltoid, and it points you to brachialis nicely. We like this for a couple of reasons. A, it's a nice visual cue to help us make sure that you don't have a miscue, a mislabel of brachialis. So brachialis, a couple of ways that we describe it. Many of us will describe brachialis, here's biceps, we'll describe brachialis as being deep to the biceps. That's the big relationship. But one that's sometimes a little easier based upon how we have to test it and on the practical is that you can always find deltoid. And if you can always find deltoid, follow it down until deltoid ends, and that's where brachialis begins.